Okay, so I'm just going to kind of give a recap of what Dr. Armenta did in our first lecture, so introduce you to our studio. So again, this is your source area. This is where you'll be writing out your code. And this is the console, so you'll see the results of you running your code. And this area is currently empty. If you remember in Dr. Armenta's lecture, he had lines of code that he had run previously, and those were all stored here. And I'll touch on that too when we're done and I close out our studio. But you can see my area is empty. I actually usually use just R, but our studio is much nicer. So I'm glad we'll be using this, for our class. It's just a much better visualization of everything that's going on. And then again, this is your area where all your files are stored. So you can see your directory. If you create folders for specific exercises or projects that you're running on, you'll see that here. Okay, so if you remember, Dr. Armenta just did some quick little like using R like a calculator. So he had 5 plus 5. I think he may have also put 5 divided by 4. So if we were to highlight just the 5 plus 5 and run that, then you can see down below in the console the result for that calculation. And then similarly, we can run the 5 divided by 4. And then as he noted, you can just kind of run the whole thing. Oh, and I think the same thing happened where it just ran that last line. But if I were to highlight both, let's say, and then run that selected area, then you'll see that both 5 plus 5 and 5 divided by 4 were run. Another nice thing with this sort of console down here is that it's nice to have all of your code up here, especially as we start to, add tools to our toolbox. This source area will have longer and longer, programs in it, and we'll want to keep all that together. But sometimes it's really nice to just go down to this console, and if you cursor up, you can see that it pulls up the last lines of code that you ran. So that's kind of a nice thing to do if you want to rerun just one line of code or the last chunk of code that you ran. The other nice thing about this console area is you can also use that area as a calculator without having to highlight and run each time. So if I were to, down in this console area, oops, excuse me. So there you see a mistake. If I were to run 8 plus 8, then it gives me 16. So, so that's a nice feature as well of R that is not a feature for some other programs that I've used. So, and that would like include SAS, for example. So I do like this feature of R. A couple other notes with R, and we'll go through this more in live session 2. One thing that I want to note that is good practice when we're coding is to document what we're doing. So, it's easy enough just to have, we have a few equations, but as you start going through your programs and let's say, part of your program is doing this, and then the next part of your program is doing something else, it's nice to kind of keep track of that. So when you look back at your programs, it's easy to sort of recall what you were trying to do. So in R, when we want to write something out in our code, but not necessarily have that run, we call it commenting out a line of code. And to do that in R, we use the pound sign. So you'll see, it might be hard to see, but it's green. So let's say, I want to write a short equation below. Okay. And then there I will write my quick equation, 5 plus 5, and you'll see, and again, it's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but in the 5 plus 5, that's all now in blue. And so that tells us that will run. If we were to run this whole program, it would just run the 5 plus 5, and R will ignore what I've written here because I've commented out. So even if I were to highlight all of that, so it ran, and then it doesn't, it won't do anything with that commented out line. So maybe this would be a little bit easier example. If I were to put 5 plus 5 up here, and then 8 plus 8 down here, and then I were to run both lines of code, you can see below that it only calculates that 8 plus 8 because that's not commented out. So that gives me 16, whereas that 5 plus 5 is commented out, so R basically just ignores it. Another nice thing that you can do in R is, and we'll be working with this a lot as we start to pull data in to analyze, but you can create objects in R, and that's basically just a data set. So very, very simple data set, let's say X, or object is actually the more appropriate term in R. And then we have an arrow pointing to the X. And let's just create an object with one value. So it has one column and one row. It's just a single data point, and we'll put 5. And then we can create another object called Y. And again, let's just give it one data point of 5, a value of 5. Okay, and now instead of saying 5 plus 5, we can say X plus Y. So if we were to highlight those rows and then run that code, you can see below, R has created this object X, it has created the object Y, and then when we add them together, we get 10. And if I were down below in the console area to write out X, it would say, it's the value of 5. And then if I were to write Y, value of 5. X plus Y down below, 10. So go ahead and give this a try. Once you install R and RStudio, just go into the source area, type out, use it as a calculator, try, writing code and commenting it out, and then running it and seeing what happens. And then in session 2, we'll do some additional exercises to get a little bit more comfortable in this environment.